Well, good morning, church. We've been talking the last couple of days out of Mark chapter 11, and Jesus visiting the temple to observe it, and then he cleanses the temple a few days later. And I shared with you yesterday about the first devotional thought from that for me was that the Jews were taking away the space that the Gentiles needed to learn about the Lord, and challenged you with some thoughts on that. I'll go back to Mark chapter 11 and verse 17 just to reread it for you. After Jesus cleanses the temple, it says this: he began to teach them, saying, so this is lessons to learn, not just a rebuke. Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it into a robber's den, a den of thieves, it says in one translation. So here's the second thought about Jesus rebuking the Jews for their use of the outer court of the temple. The Jews were selling sacrifices, things that the family was supposed to bring from home, from their own farm, from their own stock, from their own lives. They were supposed to bring these things and use them as sacrifices in the temple to present to the priest on behalf of their family, for the atonement of their sins, for the different feast and days. In other words, there was the people were, instead of doing that, they were buying what they needed in the temple right there, and then turning it over to the priest. There was no real sacrifice, no real relationship or attachment to these items they were bringing, or these things they were bringing, whether it was a 2 turtle doves or a lamb or whatever it could be. They were buying a lamb, buying the sacrifice, the doves, walk a few feet, hand them to the priest on behalf of the family. So the Jews were actually robbing themselves, den of thieves. They were robbing themselves of the real meaning and the benefit of true sacrificial worship. They were robbing God of the meaning of worshiping Him through their own personal sacrifice and offering up their own things. It was just a ritual to them. It was not meaningful. And we're told in some of the scriptures in the Old Testament that this was prophetic, that the people would become this way, but it for sure was being practiced right in front of Jesus' eyes. So they were robbing God of the relationship and the true sacrifice that goes with that relationship back toward Him, and they were robbing themselves of the opportunity to give relationally and sacrificially to the Lord. So we need to ask ourselves, are we willing to sacrifice for worship, to worship God and fellowship in His household? Are we willing to sacrifice? For some of you, this may be offensive, but in our culture today, we have become extremely comfortable with casual worship, non-sacrificial worship. And I'm just going to say it out loud: watching TV for your church is not really the same as church. Some of you have found online services convenient. We did it through the pandemic initially, and instead of getting up and going to church, we watched church in our pajamas, and instead of driving in your air-conditioned and heated automobile comfortably to a comfortable sanctuary where you could worship the Lord, instead of doing all that, you're instead of getting up and getting dressed, you're keeping yourselves apart from the fellowship, and you're just watching the church service happen. It's not the same as church. Now, it's comfortable, but that's not what God asks us to do for sincere followers. He doesn't ask us to do it comfortably. He asks us to do it fully. And we got to be careful about some of that. I know some people have medical issues and other reasons they can't do that. They have family care issues of friends and family that they're working with. But at the end of the day, worship is meant to be sacrificial. Here's another example. Sometimes when we say we're going to serve with our time, I want to give my time to the Lord, we pick things that we totally like to do in serving the Lord, and we call it sacrificial worship. We do the things we want to do and like to do to serve Him, rather than the things that may be needed. I think about people who stay after big fellowships at our church and clean and wash dishes for hours after we've had a dinner on the ground. Those people are sacrificially doing something that nobody wants to do, but they're willing to do. I think about the people that watch the nursery nursery kids. It may not be your favorite thing to do, but it's necessary. We need people to volunteer in those areas. I think about people that take the youth out to Dairy Queen and just put up with all the crazy noise and all that, getting the youth all loaded up in a van and taking them and doing that. A lot of a lot of Christians avoid those things because they don't want to give their time to something that's uncomfortable. And yet Jesus was rebuking the Jews for making worship of his Father too easy and not sacrificial. They were, in a sense, robbing God. It's a little bit of a light echo of the book of Malachi, if you want to look at the prophecy of Malachi about what was coming in Jesus' day. But I do want to remind you that worship is to be sacrificial, and we're supposed to give of our full selves to the Lord, and he asks us to do that on his behalf. So measure yourself by these scriptures and study them and look for opportunities to grow in them. We love you. We'll see you soon.